So, Sean, tell me a little bit about your podcast. I'm really excited, looking forward to hearing about it.
Thank you. We dropped this week. It's called Stage Combat: A Mental Health Story. It's available wherever you get your podcast, and it's a really unique. I think it's a groundbreaking podcast. It's the dramatization of my own personal mental health story. Uh, 3.5 years ago, I was working as a leading actor at one of the country's most powerful theaters, and I collapsed on stage. It was my first panic attack that I ever experienced, and my body was dragged off into the wings. I started sobbing uncontrollably, and it was because I didn't feel safe in my workplace. And that experience that night would begin what would be a 3.5 year mental health journey. That is the story of Stage Combat and Mental Health Story. So I put the podcast together because in the years since then, a lot of people would say, "Oh, I didn't think that would happen to someone like you." What does that mean, right?
Exactly. I was just going to say, I don't
we,
understand.
we think it will happen to certain people. I don't think it ever comes from a bad place, but it made me think, well, then maybe I should show you how it could happen to someone like me or someone like you. So the idea was, we don't talk about mental health enough. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. So by creating a serialized story set in the juicy world of the theater, which is also a bit salacious, it dramatizes how a mental health crisis happens moment to moment.
That's amazing. And how are you doing now, if you don't mind me asking? Are you okay now, or?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. And ironically, the trauma was so great, and that is the story of the podcast, that it really took a team of people to help me. But ironically, it's the making of the podcast that I think really did a lot for me. Because if you think about it, anytime you have trauma, when you're sort of having to revisit it or kind of recreate the crime scene, I call it, it's been very healing to let go of the power of that trauma, um, and also knowing that I hope the podcast will help other people, um, particularly men. We don't talk about you know, men and mental health. You rarely hear a guy talking about having panic attacks. So I hope it really opens up a broader conversation.
Yeah, I hope so too. And why do you think that is that men don't talk about it?
Um, I think a lot of it has to do with the culture of toxic masculinity, you know. Um, you know, most every guy can tell you they grew up as a boy being told boys don't cry, suck it up. You're a sissy if you do. And so, what we do culturally, and this is across the globe, we have all these reinforcements that tell men not to acknowledge your feelings, not to feel your emotions. And then if you do, or you need help or you seek help, you're going to be publicly shamed for it. So I think that is a big part of it. I think there was an element of that in my story, what happens in Stage Combat. And it's ironic because the character I was actually playing was this takes place in a production of Billy Elliot, the musical.
Oh, okay.
So I was playing the father. And if you're familiar with that show at all, that father is the epitome of toxic masculinity. So we sort of had this weird sort of, merging of art imitating art, life, and vice versa. So
Oh, wow. That's, yeah. Well, first of all, I applaud you for taking the first step in trying to get rid of that toxic masculinity, because that's bad. I mean, not to quote Frozen here, conceal, don't feel is just not the
yeah,
way to go.
yeah, yeah, it is. And yeah, I hope this has some part in trying to, you know, let guys know, hey, it's okay to say I've battled depression, I've had a panic attack. Um, but what's unique in the podcast, what we do is after the serialized story, I actually have a 10-minute conversation with a mental health professional. And we talk about some of the things that the listener heard. So you're sort of getting this sort of like a football game, and you have a halftime kind of, show, and you talk about what you heard. And so the whole thing sort of creates a unique experience of, my story is an individual window into mental health. And then we talk with a professional about a broader conversation.
That's incredible. And how many episodes is this podcast?
This podcast is 2 series. So
Okay.
the first series is 9 episodes. So we show you how the mental health crisis happened. We actually open with me on the floor, sort of like a true crime story, and kind of work our way back. How did the guy end up on the floor? And then the second series is going to drop in July. That's 11 episodes. And we're going to show you what is the fallout after a mental health crisis? What's the fallout with your employer, with your health, with the people closest to you? So it really sort of becomes an epic over 20 episodes, a 3.5 year journey.
That is incredible. Now, do you have the same mental health professional in each episode, or is it a different one dealing with each mental
Yeah,
health
so they're
topic?
different. We have an incredible our primary mental health professional in series one is Dr. Elisa Hurwitz. She's great. She also does a lot of analysis of musicals, and she analyzes the mental health stories that we see on stage. So she actually has a background, in the theater and a love for the theater. So she's really great. She really allowed me to think about things I hadn't thought about, even connecting the dots of what was happening, but also kind of thinking about where we are in the entertainment industry, that the whole mentality of, you're lucky to have a job, so shut up and be quiet, or you'll be perceived to be a problem. We got to do away with that.
Yes, thank you. And not just in the entertainment industry, in all the industries.
All industries, right? I mean, the pandemic was a wake-up call, right? Um,
Absolutely.
People said enough. We're not, we need to be humanized as workers across the board. And that comes to our mental health, because our mental health is health, you know.
And why do you think it is? Not, and I know we discussed this with the toxic masculinity, but why do you think it is that we don't take mental health so seriously? We just tell people you're getting over it, you're hysterical male, hysterical female, other people have problems, or my favorite, everybody, so there's always someone else that has it worse, so shut up. Why do you
Yeah.
think we do that? And why do you think we don't take mental health so seriously?
Well, for our history has we refuse to normalize it, right? We
Right.
refuse to talk about it. And so when it's kind of stuffed away as a dirty secret, or you sweep it under the rug, then there's a stigma, right? So what we got to do is we got to normalize the conversation. You know, I've been writing several op-eds for out of this experience. HR magazines are asking me to give my opinion of how employers can improve the workplace. And what I tell them is you need to be talking about mental health every day, because
Yes.
we spend a third of our life at work, right? So that's the best place to start. But it needs to be part of the conversation every day, just like you're talking about team building or quarterly profits. Talk about mental health.
Yes. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And talk
We don't
about
need
it
a
like,
pizza party. We need to talk about mental health.
yeah, yeah. And the more that someone like me is talking about it, or anyone, then there's a reference point, right? I heard this guy talking about it, so maybe I can talk about it, or I can be open to my friend. I can maybe see that he or she or they want to talk about it. So yeah.
Yes. And which episode, going back to your podcast, which episode of the podcast are you most looking forward to everybody hearing?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so there's a couple. I mean, we have 3 episodes out, so our building block episodes are out. I will say that once we get to episode 6, things take a really strange turn at the theater that I was working at. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And then, we took a lot of great care to dramatize the night that I collapsed on stage. It's really intense, but we wanted people to be able to not only identify it if they've had a past history, but we want people to understand just how frightening it is. The loss of control, that you don't know what's happening to your body. And so I'm really proud of that episode. And I think it will, like I said, I just want people to think about mental health in a different way, or to realize that, any kind of crisis could happen to anybody.
Absolutely. And are you going to continue making more episodes of this?
Well, as I'm talking to you right now, we're editing season 2. So, we're trying to get those ready for July. So we're promoting season 1 while we're working on season 2. And then we hope that our season 3 will actually be, conversations with Broadway personalities, everyday people. We have a couple of those coming up in the second season. So, we're just going to continue the conversation about mental health.
Yeah, and what's one issue about mental health that you think everybody should know more about or take more seriously?
I think it does come back to what we were talking about, that mental health is health. You know, it's like if you had heart problems, you would go to the doctor. Um, and if there's something happening with your mental state, that's your mind. Your mind is just as important as your heart. So that's sort of how we have to talk about these things. And I also believe that everybody has a mental health story, just some are more intense than others, right?
Right.
So the more we acknowledge that, you know, I think a lot of times when you're going through a mental health struggle, it's very easy to feel like you're alone, that you're the only person going through it, and that no one's going to understand. We had people reaching out to our social media on Instagram before the episodes came out and said, because we gave them an idea that was about panic attacks, and the people saying, I have panic attacks and no one understands me, no one gets it. you know so um I think that's the biggest thing, is that yeah, we all have a mental health story, so let's talk about it.
Yes. And how can we improve, other than saying mental health is health, how can we improve it for the next generation of children? So they don't face in school. I don't know what you face in school, but it's like, oh, you're
Yeah.
being too sensitive, you're being this, you're being that. Stop looking for attention by crying or having a panic attack or whatnot. So what can we do for our future generation?
Well, look, we've already talked about some things that we can be advocates ourselves, right? We can be advocates for ourselves, we can be advocates for our friends, but I think we have to start calling out harmful practices, you know, kind of what you're just sort of alluding to. And, you know, Sage Combat, it is my mental health story, but it does call out harmful practices in the injury in the industry, because what happened to me was not good.
Right. Yeah.
So, and in a lot of industries, those harmful practices stay quiet because people are fearful. They're fearful of retaliation. They're fearful of, ruining their chances for advancement. So we really have to start calling out those harmful practices, whether it's in our jobs or in school, you know, to change things.
Almost like a Me Too movement for mental health. I mean, I know that's not
Yeah,
the best example in the world, but
yeah, no, that's an excellent example. It's funny you bring that up, because I have been talking about this with people, is that at least in my industry, in the theater industry, after the pandemic, we saw a lot of movement in the industry about Me Too. We saw a lot of movement about diversity, equity, inclusion because of the George Floyd protest. And then we heard about mental health in the pandemic, but then it all got quiet. In our
yes, I
theaters,
remember that.
yeah, I mean, that's what we heard every day, right? But if you look at the theaters, they got really quiet about mental health, you know. And this is an industry where, I'll just be blunt with you. These theaters, they're exploiting actors' vulnerabilities to sell tickets. They exploit their emotions on stage to make money. And so, our theaters in particular, we need to they need to put a focus on mental health. And so I think it takes all of us speaking up in whatever industry we're in to kind of put that pressure on again, like what you were saying, what we saw with Me Too. And that took some really high profile cases, right?
Right,
Right.
exactly.
So we need people in power. We need prominent people. We need more celebrities to speak up. You know, I'm not anyone famous. I'm just a guy that this happened to, but you know, I'm just telling my story and trying to do what I can.
But you know what? Maybe you'll invite with your podcast, you'll inspire someone famous to come out and say that they struggle with anxiety, depression, panic
Hope
attacks,
so.
whatnot. I mean, you're very important. Your podcast is very important. And everybody listens to podcasts these days. So you never know who might be listening. So you might be starting something here.
Yeah, I hope so. And yeah, like I said, my industry, so many people are living in fear, you know, and that's why, harmful practices continue. So I hope that people find some inspiration in my podcast, to speak out on their own.
Absolutely. For what it's worth, you don't have to be afraid with me. You could just come to me whenever and talk to me, and I'll listen always.
That's great.
Yes, we all have to help each other, so I got your back. And that's another one. Got your six with the military with mental health. That's another one that, could be helpful for you too to listen to or to look into as well for
What's it
helping
called?
build your got your six.
And that's a podcast?
It's not a podcast, it's another movement similar to Me Too that helps
Oh,
military people who have suffered from mental health
yeah.
issues after coming home from combat.
Oh, that's very good. I will definitely check that out.
Yes. I
Yeah.
forget who started it, but
Mhm.
I remember hearing about it quite a bit. But it's the same principle as you're doing, only it's with military. But maybe you guys can collaborate or something.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, what is your feeling sort of in your community and where you live? Do you feel like it's difficult to talk about mental health?
I don't think it's difficult per se. I think it's more the fact that nobody takes it seriously. It's like you could talk about it, but is anyone really listening to you when you talk? They're like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I feel that way too. Yeah, everybody feels that way. Okay, what's for dinner? Like,
yeah,
okay, oh, what happened on Housewives last night? Yeah, like nobody
yeah,
takes it seriously. It's not that you can't talk about it. It's like nobody listens. That's my feeling on it anyway.
yeah. It's kind of like when we ask people how they're doing, but then we don't really want to
Yeah,
know.
exactly. That's it
Right.
exactly.
So that just comes back to basic human empathy, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Where can we listen to this podcast?
Yeah, wherever you get your podcasts. So Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio. All you have to do is go in and type in Stage Combat, a mental health story. We also have a lot of mental health content on our Instagram account at Stage Combat the Podcast IG. And we're on TikTok, Facebook, LinkedIn at Stage Combat the Podcast.
All right, I'm gonna definitely add you a follow. If I knew where my
Yes,
phone
we
was,
love
I would add you a follow. I think my cat's sleeping on it, but
that. That's great. We would love to have you as a listener.
wonderful. Well, it was a pleasure to have you, and I want to have you back in July so we can continue to
Oh,
promote
we would
season
love that.
two.
Yeah, and we'll maybe you have a chance to listen to the podcast. We can talk about it and talk about where it's going to go in series two.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it was a pleasure. Good luck, and
Thank you
remember,
so
you
much.
count, you matter, and you're amazing.
Oh, thank you. You as well.
Thank you. You have a good
Oh,
one.
okay, bye.
Bye.